Shakespeare! Welcome to What's Shakin' with Shakespeare, a brief but tedious podcast from Full Circle Players. Full Circle Players is a theater company based in Riverside, California. Greetings all, I'm your Mister of Ceremonies, Rob Foley. Rob Foley, said a Rob Foley. What's up, Jeff? Welcome to the second podcast, or Act 1, Scene 1. In this podcast, I'd like to take a lighter or less scholarly look at the bard, his work, his world, and his legacy. I'll focus on things I love about Shakespeare, the insults, major life events related to Will, the famous actors who have made their mark in the world of Shakespeare, both good and bad, and, of course, I'll rant about a little thing that, at the end of the day, isn't really that important. I've divided this podcast into different sections, which I'll visit and revisit as we go. So, without further much ado, let's begin with...
Drink, sir, is a great provoker of three things: nose painting, sleep, and urine.
That quote is a mashup of a couple of things said by the porter, the only comedian in Mackers, unless you have a pretty twisted sense of humor, that is. And, of course, it is from Act 2, Scene 3. At this time, I asked the question, what was Will drinking? What beverages, alcoholic or no, were consumed during the English Renaissance? I always assumed Will was a beer drinker, but I never bothered to find out, until now. The source here I'm using is diffordsguide.com, and boy, howdy, do they know their Elizabethan beverages. It's a great site to visit. I'll spell it for you. It's diffordsguide.com, all one word. So, would Shakespeare have been drinking alcoholic beverages at all? The answer is yes. Yes, most certainly yes. River water at the time was not safe to drink due to pollution, and this was long before people learned to boil water for more than 5 minutes to make it safe to drink. So Shakespeare, like everyone else, children included, had to drink fermented beverages if he wanted to stay alive. What, then, did he drink? Well, the first and most likely drink would have been ale. But was it anything like the ale we drink now? Well, according to Difford's Guide, ale in Shakespeare's day was stronger, sweeter, and darker than ales today. They were so strong, in fact, they were often spiced with either ginger, cinnamon, nutmeg, or cloves to mellow the taste. When Shakespeare first came to London around 1592, he would have been too poor to drink anything other than the cheapest drinks, which were ale and beer. Wine and sack were more expensive, so Will likely didn't drink those with regularity, at least until he became more successful. He probably had ale or beer with every meal, every day, from early childhood to the end of his life, as it was common to drink ale and beer as a substitute for water in lots of places in Europe at the time. Even though ale and beer are more difficult and take a lot longer to make than wine, it was cheaper, probably because grain was cheaper and it was easier to get a hold of than grapes. So as far as Elizabethan beer goes, well, we'll talk about that another time. The next time you raise a pint to your lips, remember what the porter said.
Drink, sir, is a great provoker of three things: nose painting, sleep, and urine.
Now we take a look back at this day in history 413 years ago in a segment I like to call,
What hath this day deserved? What hath it done?
This is from, the full quote is from Perdita. What hath this day deserved? What hath it done that in the golden letters should be set among the high tides in the calendar? Once again, that's a quote from Perdita, Winter's Tale, Act 4, Scene 4. The date is February 21st, 1608, and the event is the baptism of William's first grandchild, Elizabeth. The following information is from william-shakespeare.info. That's, I suppose, if you're using a Google search as your search engine, or Google as your search engine, Google search as your search. You get it. Okay. Elizabeth was the only child of Susanna, who was Will's oldest daughter. Susanna was 24 years old when she married Dr. John Hall, who had a prosperous medical practice. The wedding took place on June 5th, 1607, and 8 months later, Susanna gave birth to a baby girl named Elizabeth. 8 months, huh? Naughty, naughty. This was actually a fairly common practice to have a child who was born less than 9 months after the wedding day. Susanna, in fact, her own birth was labeled premature because she was born 6 months after her parents, William and Anne Hathaway, were married. And the expression born premature, of course, is a much politer term than shotgun wedding, which is what many believe describes William Shakespeare's marriage to Anne Hathaway. Will's granddaughter Elizabeth was baptized February 21st, 1608 at Holy Trinity Church in Stratford. This next bit comes from Elizabethan England Times. Due to high infant mortality, baptisms usually occurred within 2 to 3 weeks of a baby's birth, and babies were not given a name until they were baptized, so oftentimes they were just called the infant or the baby. Boys in England were usually named after famous kings, and girls were usually named after characters in the Bible. And the name Elizabeth is found a few times in the Bible, including the Old Testament, where Elizabeth was the wife of Aaron, as well as Elizabeth, who was the mother of John the Baptist. It is also the name of several saints and queens, and my guess is that girls named Elizabeth in the late 1500s to early 1600s were probably named after Queen Elizabeth I. I know, I'm really reaching for that one. I should apologize. Lastly, Elizabeth was the only grandchild William ever knew, because his 3 other grandchildren were born after his death in 1616. This has been
What hath this day deserved? What hath it done?
My next segment was inspired by my wife's coffee mug. This is
Roast meat for
Insult of the day.
wayward morals.
Today's insult comes from one of Shakespeare's most popular plays. Well, popular in his time, Titus Andronicus. Initially, I thought his particular insult from Act 4, Scene 2 could be the first Yo Mama joke in print, and whoops, I was so very wrong about that. Apparently, the first Yo Mama joke occurred 3,500 years ago in Babylon around 1500 BCE. But that's a whole nother podcast. So here is Shakespeare's quintessential Yo Mama joke. And the character who speaks here is Chiron. He is the son of Tamara, and he says this to Aaron, who is a black servant: "Thou hast undone our mother." And Aaron replies, "Villain, I have done thy mother."
Naughty, naughty.
I feel like a little backstory here is necessary to get the full impact of this insult. Tamara, queen of the Goths, was defeated by the Romans, who were led by Titus Andronicus. The queen and her 3 sons were taken to Rome, where Titus had Tamara's eldest son killed before her very eyes. Tamara swears to herself that she will be revenged on Titus and his family. She then marries Saturninus, who has just been declared Rome's new emperor. So while Tamara is getting her revenge on Titus, she also becomes pregnant. However, after the baby is born, it becomes clear that the boy's father is not the white emperor Saturninus, but Tamara's black servant, Aaron. Tamara's other 2 sons are shocked of this and confront Aaron, who uttered the famous insult, "Villain, I have done thy mother." And that was
Roast
the
meat
infection
like
of
onions,
brains.
sucks
Cake
with some foolish nonsense.
Insult of the day.
Flawed, wayward morals.
If you're like me, you may have asked yourself, Self, what is the weather like in Stratford-upon-Avon right now? Well, wonder no more. It's time for our up-to-the-minute weather report from Stratford-upon-Avon, and the weather is mostly clear, 39 degrees with a high of 54 and a low of 34. I feel better now. Now it's time to highlight someone who had a tremendous influence on me and my love of Shakespeare. It's time for
Base, common, and popular.
or its alternate title, Engorged Thespians. This is where I spotlight someone who, for better or worse, had a significant effect on my love of Shakespeare. Today, I'm highlighting Sir Laurence Olivier and how he kind of inspired my love of Shakespeare. I'm not sure if anyone else out there feels this way, but I have a kind of love-hate relationship with Larry. On one hand, he updated the language and the delivery of Shakespeare's words. He brought Shakespeare to the masses in many films and was in many ways a maverick of his time. For example, I once heard a recording of Sir Alec Guinness playing Mackers, and of course Guinness was an actor one generation before Olivier, and Alec Guinness literally sang the lines. I swear, this is what it sounded like when Alec Guinness played Mackers. Lay on, Macduff, and damned be him that cries, hold enough! I'm not kidding. So, Olivier was quite refreshing when it came to line delivery of Shakespeare. He really tried to make Shakespeare less sing-songy and more grounded in reality. However, many of his tragic performances were downright comical in film, specifically Richard III, Othello, and, of course, King Lear. His love of overacting and his absolute refusal to play the truth of his emotions made any portrayal of any character who wasn't a stoic Brit terrible. Almost Tommy Wiseau in The Room terrible. That was a really unfair thing of me to say. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, Laurence Olivier. I take that back. In 11th grade, I watched Olivier's Richard III in British literature class, and it was laugh out loud funny. And it was because of Olivier's acting. He was mugging to the camera. And in the first monologue he has to give as Richard III, now is the winter of our discontent, he was limping around on camera. He did this circle. He did this big giant circle with his just absolutely horrific limp. It was like one of his legs was a foot longer than the other. It was so jarring. I barely remember what he said. And what's worse, his over-the-top, groundless big performances caught on with the rest of Shakespearean actors, and so for the whole of the 80s, everyone was acting! I am a repressed Brit. Watch how I act with no bodily control whatsoever, and watch me force this emotion through a wood chipper! Ugh! Oh, it was so terrible. It was so hard to watch. This is why I mentioned previously how much I loved Kenneth Branagh. He came on the scene in the late 80s, and he put a stop to all that nonsense. Oh, and here's a story about Laurence Olivier that upsets me. It's a type of story that you're supposed to take a lesson from, but I really think I took the opposite lesson from it. Anyway, if you're an actor, you've probably heard this story. Laurence Olivier and Dustin Hoffman were in a movie together titled Marathon Man. Hoffman had to play a scene where he was physically and emotionally exhausted, so Dustin Hoffman stayed up all night and came to the set the next day looking like death warmed over. And so when Hoffman explained what he'd done to Laurence Olivier, Olivier said, "My dear boy, next time, try acting." But here's the thing. Laurence Olivier's acting sucks in that film. Dustin Hoffman, on the other hand, was great. Here's Larry being all like snooty poo-pooing Dustin Hoffman, and who turned out to be the better actor? Dustin Hoffman. Not even close. So why don't you try some acting, Larry, and get out of Hoffman's face? Oh, boy. Sorry. I forgot that this was Engorged Thespians and not my rant for a minute. To conclude, Laurence Olivier, kudos to you for breaking new ground. But some of that ground really should have remained unbroken. That was
Base, common, and popular.
Oh, Larry, you get my blood a-boiling. Now it's time for...
Keep thy spear upright.
Sorry.
In this segment, we pay tribute to the spear carriers of Shakespeare. Spear carriers are actors with few to no lines. They stand in the background, still as a statue, for minutes at a time, and the only reason they're there is to pad the number of characters on stage. On a personal note, my favorite spear carrier role I had was when I played the valet in Amadeus. Amadeus, Amadeus. Better stop, don't want to get sued. That was with the Knightsbridge Theatre Company. God, I haven't thought of them in a hot minute. The Knightsbridge Theatre used to be located in Pasadena, California. I'm not sure where it is now. I haven't done a show there for 20 years. Anyway, as the valet, I was supposed to stand in the background for every scene that took place in Salieri's apartment. So I stood still. I stood really still. I stood so still, in fact, that the director told me to look around because I was pulling focus. And I was certain that servants in real life were not supposed to actively listen to what their masters were talking about, but like a good actor, I followed direction. What's funny is I didn't even know that I was a spear carrier in that show. I didn't realize I had no lines. In fact, it was the director who eventually told me that I can improvise a line because she felt bad that I never got to speak. So I ended up saying, Frau Mozart, please, please, because I was trying to keep Constance, Mozart's wife, from coming uninvited into Salieri's apartment. Oh, but I digress. This is not supposed to be about me. This is supposed to be about today's spear carrier, Boy. I know that doesn't narrow it down much. There are approximately 9 characters named Boy in Shakespeare. The one to which I refer is from Much Ado About Nothing, and he is a snarky little imp. The scene takes place in Act 2, Scene 3, in Leonato's orchard. Benedick, for some reason, has forgotten to bring his book into the garden, so he calls for a servant to get it for him. So here's the scene. Enter Benedick. Benedick. Boy! Enter Boy. Boy. Signor. Benedick. In my chamber window lies a book. Bring it hither to me in the orchard. Boy. I am here already, sir. Benedick. I know that, but I would have thee hence and here again. Exit Boy. It isn't every day a literal 2-line walk-on character gets to give the leading man attitude, and I love the tude this little guy has. The first time I did Much Ado was with my dear friend Wendy Johnson and her theater company, and she had cast, or no, I guess it was the director who had cast Wendy's 9 or 10-year-old son at the time, Andrew, in this part. And it is a crapshoot when you are casting an actual boy to play a boy. So I remember that Andrew, when he was called, he walked on stage at just about the most leisurely pace you could possibly have. It took him like 10 seconds to get over to Patrick Weeks, who was playing Benedick at the time. And so once Patrick and Andrew had their lines back and forth to each other, Andrew turned around and just as slowly walked off stage, and the whole audience was laughing. And I think Pat even broke the fourth wall at that point and looked at the audience and made this, can you believe this kid? Wow, I can't believe Andrew is now in his 30s. I am an oldie oldster. I hope you've enjoyed our tribute to the little man in Shakespeare's plays, in this case, quite literally.
Keep thy spear upright.
Sorry.
What would this podcast be without a good old-fashioned rant about things that have little to no importance? Thus begins my rant.
Speak the speech trippingly! Not tripping, trippingly.
Today's rant centers on another word that is often mispronounced on stage and screen. The word is troth. T-R-O-T-H, troth. Troth. I can't even count the number of times I've heard this pronounced troth. People, it's not a wooden frame filled with water for horses to drink from. It's a word that literally means truth. Literally, truth. So by my troth is by my truth. So say it right. And if you are dead set to mispronounce it, say by my truth, not troth. If you want to call it troth, build a time machine and go back to 1800s, get a horse, lead it to water, and see if it drinks. It's troth, people. Troth. Thus endeth my rant.
Speak the speech trippingly! Not tripping, trippingly.
And with that, I'll exeunt, hopefully not pursued by a bear. Next time, I'll have a guest join us, and I'll get to try my hand at interviewing. Or rather, I guess I'll try my mouth at interviewing. This week's fond farewell comes from a man who's wiser than he's given credit for. I'm talking about Polonius from Hamlet, Act 1, Scene 3. As he says goodbye to his son Laertes. What a tease. Sorry, I digress. As he says goodbye to his son Laertes, he says this. This above all, to thine own self be true, and it must follow, as night the day, thou canst not then be false to any man. Farewell, my blessing season this in thee. And scene.
Shakespeare!